Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from Kansas Soybean Commission. The soybean checkoff. It works for everyone.
I keep reading about engineered corn, but I don't know what that means.
Spring water, purified water, what's the difference?
Is imported beef safe for my family?
Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. That's where Real Ag comes in. From plant to plant and from pasture to plate, Kyle Bauer and the Real Ag crew find the facts to help you sort the truth and help you understand Real Ag. Now here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
The human diet requires carbohydrates, and if you live in the United States, you probably get most of your carbohydrates from wheat. Wheat is our topic today on Real Ag. Welcome to Real Ag. I'm Kyle Bauer. Different wheats have different uses, and although most of them end up feeding humans, the subtle differences between wheats allow for a staggering number of different products.
Well, wheat is used for a lot of things. First of all, it's used as a food crop, and it is very important for breads and for rolls and for pasta, buns, cookies, cakes, and also is very important as a forage crop in Kansas. We feed our cattle on wheat forage crops.
Hard red winter wheat, which is grown mainly in Kansas and a few other states, is typically a bread quality wheat. You have a spring wheat, you have some soft wheats, both in the eastern part of the country, western part of the country. Those typically go to different products. Cookies typically are made from soft wheat. Your cookie cracker market, soft wheat. Bread market, hard wheat. Your harsh style breads are going to be your spring wheat. So, yeah, the different varieties of wheat, classes of wheat, will dictate pretty much what products it can be used for. Tortillas, another area that's growing. Actually, the pace of tortillas outpacing the white pan bread.
We also grow a little bit of durum wheat in the United States, which is the hardest class of wheat there is, and that's used exclusively for pasta. Most of that is grown in a small corner of North Dakota and parts of Arizona. In the northwestern part of the United States, they grow soft white wheat, which is a great appeal to the Asian market for their noodle supply, which is a big part of their diet.
So why is wheat such a staple? It's due to a combination of unique properties, both as a crop and as an ingredient.
Wheat is a winter crop. It's planted in the fall. In Kansas, we grow winter wheat. It's planted in the fall, and then it grows slowly through the winter, and then it is harvested in late June or early July. Unlike a lot of our other crops like corn or soybeans that are planted in the spring and are harvested in the fall, and so that allows the farmer to diversify the workload over the season, for one thing.
It's unique in a couple of different ways. One is in its broad adaptation. So wheat's grown everything from very high altitude to lowlands and tropical areas, and that's pretty unusual for crops. Usually they're more narrowly adapted than that.
It's a cool season crop. It prefers temperate conditions. 70 degrees is a really good growing temperature for wheat. And so it takes advantage of that type of weather that we have in Kansas in April or May, whereas other crops are more adapted to a warmer temperature.
Wheat's really very adaptable, and it grows in a lot of different conditions. Really kind of the conditions it doesn't like is it doesn't like really wet conditions. It doesn't like to be in standing water. And it also doesn't like really high temperatures. It's a cool season crop. Beyond that, it's very highly adaptable to fairly high rainfall all the way to drought conditions from fairly cool temperatures. It can handle some higher temperatures, can be grown at high and low latitudes and altitudes. So really it's a very adaptable crop, which makes it so widely grown worldwide. The parts of the plant, basically you have the stems to hold the head up, and you have the leaves, which are the factory for all the carbohydrate that's going to end up in the grain, and then you have the spike or the head where the grain is stored in the, and so that's really the major parts of the plant.
So one of the things that's great about wheat is that it's very adaptable to a lot of different conditions, and so it can be grown in conditions of low rainfall where maybe some other crops like corn or soybeans would have a difficult time producing a good crop. and it can be used on marginal lands where the yield potential of other crops is really too low to justify trying to grow them. When the Mennonites came over and settled Kansas, they brought with them turkey red wheat. We still have turkey red wheat. We can plant it and look at it, and the difference between turkey red wheat and the wheat that we grow now is our wheat is much shorter now. We use semi-dwarf wheats, and the reason that it's shorter is so that it doesn't fall over. That's called lodging. So turkey red would fall over, be difficult to harvest, and our new wheat stands up and stays in position for harvest. The other thing is it's much earlier. It matures in the end of June instead of in the middle of July, and that's to help avoid the heat that comes in the middle of July. And so by having the wheat be earlier, it avoids some of that environmental stress that is faced by the older traditional varieties that came from Europe. Wheat is the third most important crop in the world in terms of calories that are consumed by people. So rice and corn will be number 1 and number 2, and wheat is number 3 in terms of consumption of calories across the whole world, and it's grown in more different countries than any other crop.
USDA recommends that a large portion of your daily consumption of foods be of grain foods, basically a quarter of your consumption of foods. And they recommend that half of those grains be whole grains. And when we talk about whole grains, we simply mean you include the whole kernel of wheat in that product. When you're eating whole grain bread, it's got that whole wheat kernel in there. A lot of the cereals you see on the marketplace shelf right now say they have whole grains, and whether that's whole grain wheat or whole grain oatmeal, it means the whole kernel of that commodity is in that product. It's just much healthier for you. It's higher nutrition level. It's better for your digestive system. So a lot of restaurant chains now are offering healthy alternatives for kids in their meals, and that's going to include a lot of whole grain products. People eat wheat. It's a dense source of nutrition. It provides carbohydrates and energy to keep you going throughout the day. It's an important part of a meal for athletes, obviously, because it's nutrient and densely packed with nutrition. You get vitamins and minerals, obviously, through your consumption of wheat. It has antioxidant properties, so cancer-fighting properties. It's good for the digestive system, especially if you eat whole grain wheat. It's a very healthy part of the diet, as with anything in moderation in terms of processed foods. We hear a lot of people shying away from processed wheat flour, but it's really a good thing. The wheat flour in the United States, by law, is fortified with vitamins and minerals and folic acid, which is very important for pregnant women. We've reduced the number of birth defects in the United States and around the world dramatically by the introduction of folic acid to wheat flour for consumers. So it's very important that especially women who are pregnant and children have wheat as part of their diet. For an unbiased source for consumers on what they should eat in terms of whole grain foods and grains as part of their diet, we wholeheartedly recommend the USDA recommendations. Their food plate recommendations recommends a quarter of your consumption of food be grains foods on a daily basis, and that half of your grains make those whole grains. So obviously USDA has done the research, they've done the homework. They're a reliable source, and if you want to talk to any registered dietitian, they're very good unbiased sources for what role grains and wheat play in your diet. What we discourage against is getting caught up in some of the diet fads. The Atkins diet obviously discouraged consumption of wheat as a whole, and that's just not healthy at all. So, but look at your dietitians, your school food educators, and the USDA food guidelines as reliable sources.
You're likely to hear a lot of discussion about gluten, but what is it exactly? Gluten is a group of proteins found in wheat. These proteins give wheat flour most of its properties.
Probably the most unique thing about wheat is its protein. It's called gluten, and it's a viscoelastic protein, so it means it has some elastic properties that allows it to catch air bubbles. So that gives us the rise to things like breads and cookies and things like that, and gives us the texture. So the gluten is like little air balloons that's able to catch the gases that come off of either chemical leavening or the gases that yeast give off as they are in a bread.
If you open up your slice of bread and you look at those cells, that is basically a matrix that is being formed by the gluten. So the gluten has to be developed, and hence the mixing is what develops the gluten into what's considered a matrix. The cells are the ability for that gluten to expand gas produced by yeast. Other grains don't have the gluten forming capability, so they don't have the capability to form this bubble. They collapse, they leak. Hence, that's why it's so difficult to find a substitute for wheat for a yeast-raised bread.
Yet flour contains proteins, specifically gliadin and glutenin, which when mixed with water or agitated in the presence of water forms this sticky, gooey, gummy stuff that we call gluten. And emphasizing the glue part of it, that helps people understand the gluten part.
The problem that we've seen in recent developments is an increased occurrence of gluten intolerance, which is called celiac disease, meaning a person has difficulty in digesting gluten. There's also allergenicity to wheat, being allergic to wheat, but that's a completely different thing. That's just like any other allergy, you're allergic to wheat. The gluten intolerance thing, more and more people are being diagnosed with that in recent history. There's a couple of theories out there on why that may be happening. Speculation is that, you know, the diagnosis is just becoming more common because more people are getting tested for it. We may have had gluten intolerance all along, but doctors are finding that as a diagnosis for some stomach and intestinal problems that people have. But eliminating gluten from the diet is very difficult because gluten is in a lot of, obviously, the products that we eat beyond the ones we would think have wheat in them. Wheat is used in so many products. For example, gluten is in some gravies. It's used as a thickener. Gluten is used in some industrial products as well. So we try to encourage people, if they suspect they have a problem with gluten, obviously there are official tests that can be done to determine that. It's not best just to jump to that conclusion, but to consult with your doctor and make sure that's what the problem is. We're fortunate that we live in a day and time where there are alternatives to gluten, and a lot of the food companies are coming up with products on the marketplace that can help those people. And I think when we talk about gluten-free, there's truly is gluten intolerance, but there's also gluten-free diet fads. And obviously, you know, it's not completely healthy to eliminate whole grains from your diet. So you need to consult with a nutrition or your doctor and do what's right for you.
As consumers, we're used to going to the store and buying bread. But each loaf takes time and effort to make, and each loaf must be exactly the same. This is why even large factories have trained bakers on staff.
AIB was initially formed by the baking industry as a research arm. They needed some place to look at the quality issues, and this goes back to really baking from World War I, that inconsistencies in baking in Army field bakeries. Sometimes they produced bread, sometimes they couldn't produce bread. That came over into the commercial baking industry to where they started having problems, and they found that they needed a research organization to help solve the problem so that we can get the same bread every day. It's same volume, same size, same slice thickness, everything's the same. And that's how AIB initially got started. A year later, the school was added. So we basically in 1920, sometime around there, they started the School of Baking to teach what the research was finding, to teach bakers how to be consistent in the baking. And that's the key. The consistency in the baking is what the goal was.
Well, wheat quality is going to be defined by the product that you're trying to produce from the wheat. If you're trying to produce bread, you want a wheat variety that can have a good dough that allows the bread to rise very evenly, not have too big air pockets in it, and make a nice, light, tasty loaf of bread. If you're trying to make noodles, maybe you want a wheat that will make sure that those noodles come out a nice bright white color and they're not going to come out brown. And so we would have a different set of criteria that we use for breeding for a noodle wheat than for a bread wheat, for example.
In tortillas, you want to make sure the tortillas are round. That's the quality issue, is they'll start coming out of round. So quality is different for each product being produced. A jelly roll is going to have a different quality, different feel to the dough than bread or tortillas. Specifically looking at baking, the issues is the absorption of water into the flour, how much water you can put into the flour, that's an issue. It's also can be a margin of profit or loss for the commercial baker. If you get a wheat that's 55% absorption versus one that's 65% absorption, that's a direct loss to the commercial baker. So now he's having to make up that difference in price, generally through price increases to you. So as absorption goes down, they have to offset that with a price increase. Low volume is another issue. If the flour coming in doesn't achieve the desired low volume, then they have to put additives in to help that flour along to get the desired loaf volume. Bakeries run on time. They want that dough to be coming out at 6 or 10-minute intervals. And so if the quality of that flour is coming in, the strength of it is changing, then now they're having to change their mix time. They're not getting that consistent flour again. The bakers rely on the millers to provide them with a consistent flour. And it's up to the millers to get that flour to the specifications that the bakers are requiring. And it goes actually a little bit beyond that, because it not only has to meet the specification, it has to meet the performance issues for that particular bakery. Sometimes the flour will come in that meets the specifications but will not perform. And then it's put back on the miller to fix that particular flour. And they'll do that through blending techniques. There's various techniques to deal with differences in flour. The entire AIB is set up so that the consumer gets a consistent product, a good quality, safe, consistent product. From a consumer point of view, we have come to expect a certain quality. We measure that quality every day. Just look at the selection of a loaf of bread. The squeezing of a loaf of bread is still being done today. Even though the quality, you look at them, you don't really see the difference, you're still squeezing that loaf of bread to determine which one's a little softer. That is our idea of quality. If you open up a box of Pop-Tarts or you get a bag of spaghetti that's slightly off-colored, you're not going to be buying that brand again. You're going to key in on the defects and remember not to buy that brand again. So really it's an issue with the bakeries that they're protecting their quality, their name, that give you a consistent quality product every time. That's why they don't want to leave the bread on the shelves too long, because they start getting a little stiff, they won't sell. It's not that it's not a good slice of bread, it's just that the perceived idea is it's poor quality and you might not buy the bread again.
Consistency is extremely important in baking. It's the miller who makes sure that each batch of flour meets the quality and specifications to ensure a consistent product.
Every kid's got to have a hero in life, and I really feel blessed because I've got two. One is Betty Crocker. You can always take a Betty Crocker cake mix and either stir it, whip it, pound on it, do whatever you need to do, but make a batter out of it, pour it into a pan, and it comes out and makes a great cake all the time. Second one is the flour miller. When you see what he has to work with from day to day, from year to year, and over the long haul, one of the things that you're absolutely amazed is that he's able to produce relatively the same product day in and day out.
For a commercial baker, the miller's job is strictly provide him with the same product day in, day out, year in, year out. That's a very difficult job because you're getting wheat from all over the country, all kinds of different growing areas, all different genetics are involved. It's all being merged.
And that's one of the problems with wheat / flour, that different is not good. flour will range in quality, and quality is a subjective word anyhow. You have lower protein wheats, which are used maybe for pastries, that type of thing, and then you go to higher quality or higher protein wheats, which might be used for bread baking. And then you go even higher, they're used for buns, and even higher, they're used for bagels and pizza and stuff like that. Therein lies the problem that the miller is faced with, is that these wheats are all producing different characteristics, and yet the end user has expectations of getting the same product day in and day out. He may take wheats from different parts of the country. In fact, it's very common. For example, in our area of Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, South Dakota, this is primarily winter wheat. This is all wheat it was planted last, September, October, and it's gone over the winter. Fields were fallow, may have been grazed by cattle, and it's just being harvested now. In fact, much of the Kansas harvest is just wrapping up. So that's winter wheat, and winter wheat generally tends to be a little bit lower than spring wheat. Spring wheat is grown in the northern tier states, primarily North Dakota, Canada, Montana. You're going to see a lot of it growing up there. Well, these wheats tend to come in at a higher protein content, 1% to 2% higher than winter wheats. As a result, the miller may require some of that spring wheat to be brought in to this milling area here in Kansas and blended with some Kansas wheats or Oklahoma or Texas or whatever he's drawing from. And that blend becomes the grist, and that gives him the specification that he's looking for in that finished flour. If we go back to 1960s bakeries, we refer to them as automated bakeries, but they're much more sophisticated today as far as their level of automation between today and what we had then. So the more automated they become, the less forgiving they become too. And that puts extra emphasis on getting flour consistency, flour uniformity. The only way you're going to get that is going back to the wheat. So you have to find out what's happening in the wheat. It'll help the miller select, it's called the grist. It's the blend of wheats that he puts together that he grinds or mills to some specification. It may allow us to go back into our breeding program and breed selectively now for specific characteristics. There's a lot of intuitive guessing. And I say that cautiously because a lot of times when we say intuitive and we use the word guessing, we're thinking, well, that's pretty loosey-goosey. But a bunch of years ago, probably 30 years ago, we actually looked at particle size in flour to see if particle size might have something to do with this from different mills. And we found that it didn't. But one of the things that we knew was that when flours are checking the fineness, the particle size, the fineness of the flour, this is their tool. And he'll actually go over to the mill, he'll open up the roll stands and put his hand in there, and he'll take that and he'll just rub it between his fingers, and he'll go over and make an adjustment, either open or close the rolls to make it finer or coarser, whichever he feels needs to be done. And we thought, wow, that's going to be pretty subjective, until we started using a microtrack particle size analyzer, which is now putting some very precise numbers to the particle size range, and that was very accurate. So flour millers are, they serve a long apprenticeship. You don't just come out of college and, today you're a student, tomorrow you're going to be a flour miller. You earn that title. That's earned over a period of time. You may work in a flour mill for many years, and then maybe when the chief miller retires, you may graduate into that position. So the apprenticeship can be quite long.
Compared to other crops, wheat has changed very little over the centuries, but that's changing. With more demand for wheat comes more interest in creating new strains to meet the consumer's needs.
Wheat's important in the United States for a lot of reasons. Obviously, it's a major food crop. It's used in many crop rotations, so from a crop production standpoint, it's important in crop rotations, both for production and for breaking disease cycles in other crops. It's an important crop from an export standpoint, so it has high economic impact for the U.S. And so there's a number of reasons why it's really a critical crop for U.S.
Fungicides are something that can be used to control some of the foliar diseases. We can spray the crop with a fungicide and suppress the diseases. But one of the most important ways is through genetic resistance. And so that's what a lot of the research is in the USDA and at KSU, is trying to develop wheats that have genetic inbred resistance to some of these diseases. And that's environmentally friendly, and it's also can be cheaper than doing it some other ways. Breeding plants for genetic resistance is probably about a 100-year-old enterprise. And so we've been trying to learn why plants are resistant, which plants contain resistance, and how to move that resistance into the varieties that we like for about 100 years. But the technology has been, of course, improving that whole time.
It's an interesting time for wheat right now. We've seen increased investment from private industry in wheat breeding. I think that's healthy for wheat. I think that helps wheat to become more competitive with soybeans and corn. Certainly we're not a crop that has GM products available at this point in time. It seems like that's a probability that we'll eventually have GM wheat, so that's something that would be a change that's on the horizon. As we seek to feed 9 billion people by 2050, I think we're going to have to find new things both in terms of genetics and in terms of crop production management in order to be able to meet that challenge. So I think that there's going to have to be some fairly unique things happen there in order to be able to meet that challenge for the future.
That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. Hopefully the information presented here gives you a better understanding of wheat and wheat products. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, helping you sort the truth and helping you understand Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from Kansas Soybean Commission. The Soybean Checkoff. It works for everyone.